Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. Today, with me in the house is the Vice-Chancellor, Humanities, Curtin University, Dr. Richard Blythe. Hello, Richard.
Hey, Chucky, how are you?
Very good to see you today. So just before we begin, we know that you're Vice-Chancellor, Humanities at Curtin University, Australia. So how does your role at the university inform learning and teaching? And if you're looking at academic integrity policies and all the things we do in regards to technology and use for learning and teaching, how does your role inform this?
Yeah, okay, well, fairly big question.
Yeah.
So as Vice-Chancellor Humanities, I do sit over all of the academic programs within Humanities, and I sit on academic board for the university, which is the peak governing board for academic matters, which would include all of those categories and particularly academic integrity. And so within my teams are all the people that look after how we set assessments up in the first place, how we manage those assessments, and then how we deal with issues of academic integrity on the ground, as students are handing in assignments and units, and how we bring students into that process and also help them understand matters of academic integrity, which in this day and age are shifting and moving reasonably quickly.
Yeah. Just talking about assessments and your role at university in forming learning and teaching strategy. Can you talk to us about your institution's overall strategy for assessment, especially when it comes to students meeting learning outcomes?
So I'm not sure that our university would be all that different to others. I mean, the primary task of assessment is to really ensure that graduates from units and from courses and programs have met the learning objectives that have been set, and that those outcomes are consistent with the AQF, the Australian Qualifications Framework, and that then also helps us situate those learning outcomes in terms of an internationally recognisable set of attributes and qualifications that students graduate with. So I think that's really the overarching aim from a sort of process perspective. But assessment goes a lot deeper than that, in that it's a really critical part of the learning journey itself. And in a way, that's the most valuable component of assessment, is to help students understand progress that they're making in their own learning journey, and to give really smart and responsive teachers the feedback that they need about how individual learners or groups of learners are engaging with a particular set of questions, or how they're developing their skill sets depending on what it is that's being assessed. So I think it has there's those two sides all the time to what assessment is and how it operates. And people, and within that, of course, then you have summative and qualitative kinds of assessment activities that are different gauges and have play different roles in terms of how they inform teachers and learners in those activities.
So now we had COVID hit, of course, and November of 2022, we've got ChatGPT now. So the assessment landscape has changed a little bit, or I'll say it's changing. What are your institution's top priorities for tackling this new challenge, especially with AI writing, or even how this is going to impact academic integrity overall?
It's a really intriguing space. I mean, what AI is going to do for the world is a really interesting and open question. If my cleaning robot at home is any indication, it's not necessarily going to be an ideal outcome. So I think we can get a little bit too excited about just where the technology's got to and how much it will do next. And I think we have to keep in mind some of the perspectives that AI is probably at a pretty early stage of development as yet. It can do some things extremely well, but understanding what it is doing is really critical, I think, in trying to understand what its role is in learning environments and in how human learning happens. So that's that's really my focus as a Pro Vice-Chancellor, is trying to know better how innovations like this will impact human learning, and then how we manage that, and how we best take advantage of it.
Yeah. Talking about the potential impact of AI, I'm sure you've got educators who are either for it or against it. So what are their educator sentiments around AI and where it's going?
Yeah, to be honest, I've not really heard too much negative talk. I've really heard more a lot of curiosity. What could this do? How could it work? There's a lot of concern about questions like authenticity, and that's the kind of big one that comes up in assessment. How do I know if this assessment has been authentically produced by that learner? And so that's really my focus, is how we would think about that in terms of the way AI continues to inform and impact on how students engage in their own learning process. But for me, it's not really a particularly scary territory, and I'm not sure that we need to be too tense about that. We certainly need to be aware of it and understand what it does. But it really does come back to the authenticity of an assessment task itself is really about how can this assessment task help a student move from where they start to where they're going to end up, and how does it help them gauge their progress in that regard, and how does it make that visible and give us evidence that journey has been undertaken in a way that is reliable and we can trust, and we know it's you that's actually been on that journey. And yeah, I think that's really, for me, where the questions lie.
Okay, so you've talked about the evidence with regards to the potential impact of AI in the education landscape. But when it comes to learning and teaching and student experience, just in addition to what you said, are there any big concerns beyond what you've mentioned for learning and teaching? We've talked a little bit about assessment, but when it comes to learning and teaching, I'm sure there will be concerns around what does this mean, how we teach, and how we conduct learning, or even our learning experience for our students. Are there any other big concerns?
Well, I think the biggest concern is helping students actually understand the purpose of assessment and the purpose of degree attainment, for example. So I do think we need to be spending time talking to our students about what those purposes are. So if a student comes in thinking, well, the purpose of being here is to get a certificate, and to get a certificate I need to have these boxes ticked, then that's a real problem. If they see it as an opportunity to become much better at something, then I think you're in a very different space in terms of how trustworthy the process and the system will be. And of course, at the end of the day, a student who graduates without authentically having been through that transformational process finds themselves with a huge problem, because actually they can't do any of the things that they will be expected to do with that. So I think having those kinds of conversations is really important. I think, AI in the end will be like the calculator and the abacus. They'll enable us to do things in different ways, some things faster, some things better, some things that will require different ways of thinking about how you interact. So for me, there's some great opportunities to think about how do we set up assessment tasks that involve AI in really interesting ways. What sort of question are we going to ask our students of AI? Well, how could you use this thing? What can this do? And I think there's quite a bit of confusion about what AI does. There's that fantastic session this morning at Universities Australia about the voice and what that is. And there was a really brilliant image in that of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I had not actually realised how big that document is. When they were holding it up, it's like a massive. And what strikes me about that document and then the previous requests to government about representation is that these are formal documents that are presented also as an artwork. So if you notice, it was an artwork.
Yeah, it was beautiful artwork. Yeah.
With the signatories, with the statement, and it was a very holistic way of looking at it. Now, if we jump to AI, I can go to DALL-E, for example, and I can ask it, create me an Indigenous Australian artwork.
Yeah.
And it says on the page, this AI creates art.
Yeah.
I think that's highly contestable, by the way. But it will create something that is an imitation of art. But there's something that happens there where we start to confuse what's artificial, and it is artificial intelligence, right? And it's called artificial intelligence for a reason. It's an artificial, and it's a simulation because it doesn't actually mean anything. And so the key difference is that if you look at that Uluru Statement from the Heart as an artwork or as a piece in itself, it has something about it that's not the same as the simulation or the artificial reconfiguring of colour and line and things in a way that looks like it could be
the real thing,
Indigenous art. And that is its connection to its history, to its own history, to the systems and processes of its making. I mean, what an amazing story of all these people coming across one of the biggest continents in the world to this place to have this conversation that's then captured in this work. That's very different from just the patterns and the shapes that are on it. And then how that connects to its future. So if you're thinking about assessments and an object like the statement itself, or you're thinking about assessment and an object which is a text that generated by AI, then the way to really, if you like, expose the AI artificial.
The artificial part of the AI.
I'm trying to choose my language carefully so I don't dump people in it. But if you want to know, is this artificial or is there some genuine learning that's happening here? Is to say, how is this connected to the processes by which it was made? And how is it connected to its history of how the learning happened, if you're looking at an assessment task? And how is this connected to the future? What is the student, where has the student got to and then able to project into having done this task? And if they're the things that you're assessing, no AI can help the student, if you like, or not help. No AI can successfully substitute something that could be misunderstood as being the authentic product of that student's learning. So for me, that's the way, if we think about it in those ways and we structure the assessment tasks around those kinds of questions, rather than is this object, this text or whatever it is that the AI has produced, does it meet the assessment criteria? If you set the assessment criteria around how does this link to its history and how does it link to its future, the AI can't be problematic.
I'll continue moving on, but I just wanted to touch on the assessment. I know I'm hearing a lot of positives with regards to introduction and opportunities, like you put it, with regards to AI. Will there be need to rethink assessment policies around that? Because sometimes the policies might be suggesting a specific way of doing an assessment. So, and how quickly would universities adopt in making those changes? Some universities might take 2-3 years to go through the academic board. Some they might allow minor adjustments, but what are your thoughts on that and on how that would be?
Yeah, I think it will absolutely demand a continual review and revision of assessment policies, and that's pretty normal business in universities, and it takes a little bit of time. It's not that it's not that time consuming. It will go through a normal academic year process. The only thing that slows it down really is not, you can't sort of roll it out tomorrow because you've got a group of students who have come in under a set of expectations, and you need to set the expectation up in advance. So we have to be polite about how we give notice about a change in assessment practice. But I do think it will result in all kinds of innovative ways of thinking about assessment. And there's different kinds of things you want to assess too. So one thing that you might want to assess is instant recall. Can I remember the facts? And some people call this a sort of lower level learning. I'm not 100% convinced about that. I mean, if I'm talking to my doctor, I want him to know what the drugs do and what you don't want there to be any confusion there. So actually, the ability to be able to recall facts quickly is one form of learning that can be quite important and very important in some disciplinary areas. Well, potentially, I think there's fantastic ways that AI could actually be involved in assessment of that in a way that helps learners learn that stuff, and that can really change how you think about maybe the lecturer's not actually doing that part of the assessment, or not having to bring in assessors, sessional assessors to assess that part. And then maybe that frees up other time in the assessment process to look at some of those more qualitative aspects. Well, how did you go about this? Chocky, how did you engage with this process? What methods did you use? How did you think about this? And how's it changed how you're looking at your own future or your own understanding of how you would deal with this problem? So, I think there's challenges and opportunities there that will be fascinating to continue to explore.
Anyway, just moving lenses a bit, AI, the technology itself is sitting or is being housed by an edtech company. I want to hear your thoughts on how edtech companies can consider, or what they should take into consideration when rolling out this type of technology for institutions. There are schools of thought that say it would be good if some people spend time with some academics and get them in the room and get a sense of where they're going in terms of direction. But ChatGPT just came out in November, and I don't think anyone was warned about it. So what are your thoughts on, in the future, if these things happen, how can edtech companies successfully roll this out?
I think edtech companies will do what they will do, and that's their business. I'm not really sure that universities should interfere with their free planning of how they want to go about things. But what I would say is that I think there's fantastic opportunity for collaboration. At Curtin, we've introduced 4 futures-oriented lenses through which we're trying to understand how the humanities can help the communities that we serve address the challenges that they face. And one of those futures is learning futures. How do human beings learn? How is that changing just because of societal changes and things? How's it changing because of educational changes and technology changes? And how does that human learning happen in social groups? So how does a corporation learn would be an example of a social learning system. Every major company, every edtech company itself has to be a learning system. So we're trying to understand how human learning happens using those kinds of lens. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity for edtech companies to work with people who are experts in human learning, everything from the psychology to the practicalities of delivering human learning. And I think the edtech products that came out would be much better if that were the case. But actually most edtech companies I know spend a lot of time talking to people who are pretty good at educating. So I think that's probably happening a lot anyway, as it should. And it will be interesting. We are moving into interesting territory where then large companies control things that we're in many ways dependent on. So, the latest Meta authentication system where I now need to pay Meta monthly to be authenticated is an example of that. So it's not just in edtech, it's happening in technology generally, the way it's impacting our lives, and it's happening with the rise of the mega company and the mega companies that have become bigger than nations and that control satellites that impact Ukraine and its war against Russia, that control our identities. That, it's we have to really think through what that all means and how it works. But I certainly think that it's at the same time very interesting organic space that we can start to imagine and reimagine scenarios and human futures that we haven't thought of before. But we do have to do that understanding the ethical and moral implications of those decisions. And that's where things like how you set up governance around that, how you set up social expectations, how you monitor that and so on, policy frameworks that we create that allow that to happen, or that to some extent govern frameworks around that, are all really critical. And it shows the work that we have to do, because there's a lot of stuff we have to keep pace with there.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of learning for us. I do like the idea of Curtin already having a futures, like creating that opportunity for collaboration.
Fantastic. I can send you an enrollment form.
Do you think there is, with AI and COVID and everything that's happened, there are people saying we should go back to pen and paper? Do you think that would be the case? And or general, what are your thoughts with regards to that? Do you think that's something we should go back to, or a little bit of both?
Well, given the quality of my handwriting, I hope not. No, look, I think that's not a very helpful way, because when you say pen and paper, when you say go back to pen and paper, the inference is we go back to a former way of dealing with things, and that's really not going to help us understand how to engage with this technology. On the other hand, there's all sorts of, if we talk about children in a classroom, actually pen and paper is a really great fine motor skill development thing that helps create neuron pathways and all kinds of other physical impacts that it has in the brain. So yes, I think hand drawing, hand writing, all that sort of stuff is still really critical. We're human beings with physical objects, and our brains are connected to every part of our body. It's not just some thing floating in liquid in here. But I don't think that's a useful way of responding to changes in technology and so on. And we should be open to bring this technologies in. I mean, I'm old enough to remember calculators being banned from exams.
I do remember that.
Having to take in those, all the paper resources and so on. And I don't think it's really damaged human learning to actually have opened that up a little bit. And
I have a better story. I remember when we had the anti-logarithm tables, when we had to calculate logarithms with the tables.
They were my nightmare at school.
So I think that shows how much technology can impact what we do, because that took a lot of time. Exams that would be like 2 hours were now down to like 30 minutes for a question of that nature. So I think there are opportunities and I hear you when you think about the ethical considerations and think about what that means in terms of what we're currently doing. I'm also curious to know, with AI on the rise and AI generated work, we know students, ChatGPT is sort of an AI, I'll call it an AI-assisted writing tool. Where does detection fit in as a strategy for us, in your case, Curtin University?
This does go back to some of our earlier comments that it depends what you're looking for. Detection, I think, is really helpful. I mean, I think some of the technology developments around being able to scan texts and pick up copied sections and so on has been really helpful. And so I guess in relation to AI, this is another step again in terms of trying to understand whether what we're looking at is authentic. But that authenticity comes from the connection of the writing to its own histories and to its futures. And that's really, if you can test around that, you don't need to rely so heavily on other forms of detection. Although I still think those forms of detection are helpful, and I think it's helpful for learners to understand that it's also not the point.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the fact that you can give me this text is not the point. The point is, did you learn something? I can remember going, I partly came out of architectural history, and I can remember students' shock when I would look at an assignment they had written, and I would say, this piece here, you didn't write that. Oh yes, no, I did write that. I said, no, my friend Philip Goad wrote that. Like, he's an architectural historian who actually wrote that. Yeah. And I was how this is mega brain walking around, it's like knows every quote. But of course, it's your field, and you have a sense about it, and you can see it. And so these forms of not understanding from a student perspective what the purpose is, and then thinking that there's an achievement there by just placing text in there. This is something that we really need to deal with, but from a learning perspective rather than from a let's identify the cheats perspective. So that's how I would look at it. I think if we're setting up assessment tasks in such a way that we would be unsure about the connection of that piece of work to its own history, then we're probably not setting up assessment tasks in a way that's as effective as they could be as a learning tool. Not whether you're identifying cheats or not, but are you really assisting human learning here? So I think, I'm more interested in technologies, not technologies that catch cheats, but technologies that catch students in the act.
Okay.
And then help them understand
why
perhaps
that's wrong. Yeah.
This is there are other ways you could think about this. Yeah, okay. Actually, there's some other thing here that's important. It's not just that and as I'm really not a great technologist, but as I understand these kinds of emerging AIs, they can be really fantastic, a bit like the calculator. Do lots more calculations very, very fast. Well, these kinds of technologies can help us understand a representation of a lot of things that are already out there. I'm really not convinced that AI is at all creative, and this comes back to the artwork. This is one of the reasons why I would contest that AI can actually produce art, because there isn't that connection to a history. It's just a fairly abstract connection of bits of data, and as I hear AI experts say, it's not actually thinking. It's not thinking in the sense that we would understand thinking, and actually that the reconnection of things in new ways where we see an opportunity beyond what's currently understood. That's where creativity kicks in, and where that connects us to some deep historical trajectory and projects us into some next state. That's where creativity really sits, and I don't see AI doing that at all yet.
Yeah.
And learning tasks really should be mapping how students are coming to terms with that set of capabilities.
Yeah, I think you've actually called out what is essential in terms of how we design assessments. But I'm also aware that the redesigning part of it might take some time, and it might require even educators actually learning how to use this AI to embed them in their learning and teaching, which I'm guessing will be part of professional development in the long run. Just so that we can wrap up this, there was a statement I pulled out which was a statement by TEXA, Tertiary Education Quality and Standard Agency. I'm going to read it verbatim just to get a sense of what your thoughts are on the statement and the suggestion. It says, TEXA's Integrity Unit Director, Dr. Helen Ginnell, said, while some institutions are banning AI through their institutional policies, the long-term response to open source AI tools would need to be more sophisticated than just banning them. What are your thoughts on that, just as we wrap up?
My thoughts? we should be going and getting the AI.
Oh, okay.
We're not going to be got by the AI.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I think she's absolutely right that there's huge opportunity there for us. We need to be engaging with it in very clear ways. So in some cases, it's not going to be appropriate to access AI tools in some tasks, and that's fair enough. But that's a little bit different to a sort of institutional ban. I'm not sure what the people in the computing and AI department at those institutions are thinking, but because they're the ones developing all this. So these are human tools that require, that require us to think deeply about how we use them and what we can use them for and for what purpose, and to put them in an ethical frame, to put them in a learning frame, and that's what we do. I mean, that's what universities have done for a very long time, and I guess we'll continue to do them.
I think that's a great way to put a wrap on today's Integrity Matters by Turnitin. Today we've explored a perspective of what AI would look like in our learning and teaching spaces. I've been talking to Dr. Richard Blythe from Curtin University today, and he's shared his thoughts on how we might approach it or what the landscape would look like. I would like to say a big thank you to Richard for his time today. So big thank you, Richard.
My absolute pleasure, and great talking to you, Chuck.
Likewise.